right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. When broaching a subject as complex and controversial as the idea that there may in fact be humans who aren't entirely human, also known as hybrids, you undoubtedly get pulled down the proverbial rabbit hole. Such was the case in what you are about to hear. My conversation with the co-author of Meet the Hybrids, Miguel Mendonca, went in a myriad different directions, yet all connected to the central idea that humans exist on this planet who are also part ET. But this conversation was much more than just about do they exist or do they not. We've been down that rabbit hole before. Here we discuss the idea of belief and truth and humility as it relates to the hybrids and of the species at large. We also address the shadow side of the hybrid experience, like abduction, not just by the aliens, but by our own. A constant interplay of shadow and light, where the malevolent and benevolent seem to coexist in the hybrid experience. But most importantly, what can we glean from hearing about the lives of these unique individuals in order to better understand ourselves? It's always a special treat when I get to have on not only a colleague, but a dear friend. And today is one of those days. Miguel Mendonca is the author of several widely respected books, all dealing with the experiential aspect of which we refer to as the ET and UFO phenomenon. Those books include Being with the Beings, We Are the Disclosure, 700 Years of Research on ET-Human Interaction, and one that I had the pleasure of narrating for the audiobook version, and that's Meet the Hybrids, The Lives and Missions of ET Ambassadors on Earth. The latter, Meet the Hybrids, will be our focus of discussion today, and I thought it would be apropos to make this the cornerstone of our chat, based in part on an article that was recently published in the UK newspaper The Metro, titled, "Aliens Are Already Breeding with Humans and the New, quote, hybrid will save the world." Now, clearly, the headline might call into question the credibility of such a phenomenon, just based on the inference, hybrids will save the world. But when you dig into the article, and I'll be sure to post a link so all of you can read it yourself, a respected academic, a professor at Oxford's Oriental Institute, is adamant about the reality of a variety of alien species breeding with humans, and then it goes into his theories as to why. But that aside for now, Miguel, you read this article, and I know you, having authored a most comprehensive volume on this idea of ET human hybrids, you're very familiar with all of this, and you have a most sophisticated and thought-provoking philosophy on who they are and what they represent, and we're going to dig into that shortly. But first, what were your initial thoughts on that article?
To be honest, it just reminded me that I had already heard of this guy a few years back. I think he made similar headlines just for giving a lecture on the subject. And I think he and I touched base at that stage, but he was actually out of the country. And I just forgot about it, so we didn't get back in touch. But I emailed him this morning, so I would be very interested to look at his research to see what, to examine the grounds of his thesis. How has he put this together? Who has he spoken to? Where has this come from? I don't know if he's just read the literature or if he's actually undertaken his own research. And because the book he's published is only available in Korean at this stage, right now I have no way of delving in further. So I've asked him to send me along an outline of the book, its sort of central argument, and ideally a little bit about his research, his methodology, and I'd be interested to see, has he spoken to any hybrids, or has he just basically drawn this from the existing literature, of which there is, frankly, very little.
That's a good point. And in fact, like I said, I'll put a link for the article. It's not a long read at all, but I know that I don't have it in front of me, but I recall that he's come up with this hypothesis that includes sort of three ideas as to why this may be going on. That there may be a variety of non-human intelligence breeding with humans. One of which has to do with climate change. Interestingly, what did you think about that?
Well, when I first got into this whole subject, one of the things that I said to all the hybrids is, have a word, would you? If you are genuinely connected to these guys, and if it is a two-way communication, then would you please, for the love of God, tell these people to up their game, because everything on this planet is crashing and burning. I did 10 years studying, working in sustainability policy and practice, and frankly, I have always been confused by, or at least questioned, the whole premise of other beings coming here and working with individuals on raising their awareness around these issues. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean. You know, what is required on this planet? I mean, it is a state of absolute emergency, and it has been for a long, long time. But my sense is that probably humans will not fix it. I don't think it is in our nature. Otherwise, we would have done it already, because it's not a question of information. I think if you can go actually back to the 1870s and find the first research that was done that basically provided a forecast of the effects of overproduction of CO2 on this planet, what happens when you keep adding to the natural greenhouse effect, when you keep supplementing that with other climate-forcing gases, particularly CO2 at that time. You know, it's the Industrial Revolution, and so they could basically see that that was going to increase warming. And yeah, they did not have the sophistication to understand all of the kind of feedback loops that would be triggered by increases in global sea surface temperatures and so on and so on and so on. But the information was there to say, if we keep burning coal and clearing rainforest, all this sort of land use change, the kind of agriculture that we were practicing, livestock agriculture, there's lots and lots of processes already underway back in the late 1800s that you could understand how, with an increase in population, an increase in mechanization through industrialization, etc., that we would need to shift the basis of our energy system. That was clear then, that, you know, 150 years ago. And if that's the case, then it has never been an information deficit that is pushing humanity in this direction. I mean, we could speculate on all of that, and you could get to quite a philosophical place, and you could look at the kinds of kind of cosmological and philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual ideas that crop up in this field, which is all about reality being an experience engine, essentially, or an evolution engine, and experience is the fuel. And so you could, in an infinite reality, have a situation in which a group of consciousnesses take form on a given in the 3D and experience the limits of materialism. And to me, that, as much as anything else, is what we are experimenting with here. I mean, we are already seeing what the limits of materialism are, and that is the end of life on Earth, certainly human life. I mean, humans are very fragile beings. I mean, we are pretty good at surviving individually and in small groups, but as a species, it's not happening. We are running rapidly in the opposite direction, and then you get the Trumps of this world who come up with the kind of cockeyed thesis like climate change is a Chinese hoax.
Yeah.
It's a Chinese hoax to
Right.
destroy American industry. I mean, words fail me.
Yeah.
So with that kind of quote unquote leadership, you might start to think more broadly about, well, if this experience here is going to continue, it needs to shift radically in its foundation, in its economic, financial, industrial, and energy bases. All of these things have to change. There's no other way in which we can continue. And
I
if
agree.
humans are not going to produce this shift, then is it possible that some other type of consciousness can, in fact, find a way onto this planet in a more meaningful way? I mean, you get the sort of David Jacobs thesis, that the whole takeover thing. So for him, it's a dark thing and his idea of darkness is that humans are supplanted as the apex predator, the top of the food chain on this planet. That's my impression of his thesis. But Dr. Chi is coming at it in a very different manner. And for him, I think he sees it in a much more benign fashion. And in fact, it reminds me that Juju, in her chapter in Meet the Hybrids, says, well, what's the difference? What's the difference? I mean, so humans help another life form to exist here, to have an experience. Like for her, and many people like her, the context is so radically different that the average person would never be able to grasp it. And I think they would retreat into fear in much the way that the Jacobses of this world might, if that's fair.
That was an extraordinarily, not just long, but chock full of philosophical implications, this answer that you gave to my relatively short question. We just went down a rabbit hole that I'm sitting here going, do we want to continue down this whole rabbit hole or do we want to go somewhere else? It all relates in the end, but thank you for that. Okay, there's a lot for us to chew on there. Let's get into Meet the Hybrids. I want to play a clip for the audience, but before I do, let me set this up a little bit. Throughout this book, Miguel, I would dare say the reader or the listener gets a real bird's eye view of the scope of experience that these hybrids live. And as a result of the realization that they've learned that they are hybrids, many, if not most, had a complete change in direction in their life's purpose. Some have endured great pain and trauma as a result of their, let's say, unique position in life. I want to share a clip from the audiobook that underscores what I'm talking about here. This is from a regression that your co-author of the book and my colleague and friend, Barbara Lamb, did with one of the hybrids that you interviewed, Charmaine de Rosario Sage. Now, this is quite the testimony, and I'll say that this, for me, was probably one of the most difficult parts of the book for me to narrate from an emotional perspective. So to set this up, this has to do with Charmaine being literally kidnapped and examined, not by what some call the others, non-human intelligence, but by our own military forces. So we're going to give the audience about a 5-minute clip, and then I would like to discuss this a bit with you, Miguel. So let's go ahead and play that clip. Regression with Barbara Lamb, August 2015. I was seeking information on the 2 occasions I shapeshifted into my reptilian form. One was on a military base, and the other was in a cave with 3 reptilian beings. Barbara first took me back to the moment that I was taken by the military from my home in Sussex to a base in the UK. I'm in my bed at night, and I can hear a helicopter outside. It's not unusual to hear helicopters around where I'm living. I can see 4 people in the room who feel distinctly male and military. They have a stretcher with them and wear plain dark suit jackets. They have a strange feel to the material. All 4 have short hair, one with very blue eyes who for some reason stands out despite the room being dimly lit. I'm injected with something in my upper left arm. I begin to feel very heavy, and soon I cannot move or speak. There is a kind of body bag attached to the stretcher which I am placed in. It has a full-length zip, which they close almost entirely, but leave a small section unzipped to aid my breathing. I feel myself being lifted up. Then I'm taken out to the helicopter. 2 of the men get into a black car nearby, and the other 2 get onto the helicopter with me. We fly for some time. The men check on me occasionally to make sure I'm still unconscious, but do not appear to speak to each other or the pilot. It's very cold. Eventually, we land, and I'm carried out and down a slope. It's cold. It smells damp. We go down a corridor in an underground facility, and I can see bright lights overhead. They turn left into a small, dimly lit room, then take me out of the bag and put me on a bed. There's a small table by the bed, and I can see stairs leading down. The man with the blue eyes stays in the room with me, and the other man leaves. The men have stayed completely silent. A man that I had not seen before comes into the room with a box, and Blue Eyes opens it. It holds a metallic, cylindrical implement about 10 to 12 inches long, which has 2 needles coming out of one end and a wire coming out of the other. I have a strong sense that it holds a liquid that they will inject me with. Blue Eyes brings the device to the bed and inserts the 2 needles into my upper left arm. I can feel liquid pumping in. The sensation is very cold, and it seems that the wire coming out the other end of the device is an electrical wire that trails out of the door. I have the sense that it is connected to something, but I cannot see what. As well as the cold feeling, my body also feels heavy, and I find it hard to breathe. The men begin to talk, and I hear a kind of electrical whirring noise. They are speaking about starting something, and I have the sense that the liquid that has been injected into my body is to facilitate an electrical impulse inside my body. An electrical current is now coming from the needles and running through my body, and the pulse intensity is increasing. The sensation becomes painful, and the cold is replaced by heat, which increases and continues to be felt throughout my body. The sensation is unlike any other I have felt. I can feel my muscles contracting without me actively doing this. My bones feel as if they are stretching. I want to move but cannot, nor can I speak. My skin feels very tight, as if it's stretching. I can feel my muscles growing, my whole anatomy changing. My fingers feel as if they're getting longer. I feel my tail begin to emerge and grow, and my skin changes to scales. Well, obviously, we only got the beginning of what was a distinctly disturbing recollection of essentially a MILAB, or military abduction scenario. Journeyers, you'll obviously have to get the book to hear the rest of this story. It's really something. And needless to say, it was quite a jarring experience for Charmaine. How common, Miguel, do we think these sorts of abduction of hybrids are? What are we looking at here?
Well, I can say that originally in Meet the Hybrids, there was a question in the original questionnaire which said, have you ever had any contact with the government or military? And we're talking really about these kinds of. We're talking about a run-in. We're not talking about, um, having a chat with a cop on a street corner. Uh, and interestingly, we ended up taking it out because virtually everybody said yes, but they also said, particularly those in the US, they said we don't want to talk about it. We just don't. Is that law of attraction thing? We do not want to attract that stuff, and so so we took it out.
Okay, so
Obviously,
that was a question that you originally, because just so people know, the book is categorized or sort of structured so that both Miguel and Barbara, I believe, are asking questions to the hybrids. There's a series of questions that are pretty much posed to everyone, and that was one of them. You said, and initially, but it was taken out.
originally, yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Basically, people said we just don't want to go there. We don't want to have that conversation, and I don't know that it was everybody, but it felt like uh, it felt like it was pretty universal, and so we didn't open it up.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been, several times when, people have said, well, we want to look at their DNA, we want to test it, we want to, see what would come up in a lab. Like, would it come up with anything interestingly anomalous? And for the same reason, they said, no, thank you. We do not want to give our DNA to other people. And when people read Meet the Hybrids and get further into that particular experience of Charmaine's, they'll really get where people are coming from, because, let's just say it comes up. And yeah, I think there's a genuine fear of
Conjuring it up.
MILABS,
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah, because some of them, uh, I'm not going to say who, but some of them have shown me marks on their body, have sent pictures of marks all over their body, and said, I don't know who's doing this. Is it us? Is it them? Who is it? And in some of them are just one of them I said, well, look, what, like, if you had a chance, I think I asked one in particular this question, just in a general chat, offline sort of thing. If you had one question that you could get a straight answer to ask the beings in particular in this case, what would that question be? And he just said, what the F? What are you doing to me? Why are you taking me? What am I for? What? And yeah, I've talked. I don't know how many people in this field experiences who get all sorts of craziness going on at night, and waking up with all sorts of marks, and they do not know often who who is taking them and why. This is one of the things I kind of had to get my head around, because there's this idea, I think, that people have of hybrids, that they are all knowing, that if they're a hybrid, they know what the beings know, but that is just not the case. I mean, you meet some people who say they're hybrids, who will, not the people in the book, but I have met people who say they're hybrids who, have an almost messianic kind of feel to them, that they're saying, well, I know it all. I do know it all. I know everything about everything. I have all the answers. And this is how it is. And anybody who says otherwise is wrong and misinformed. And so those people, I cannot take that seriously. It's the reason why I couldn't take religion seriously as a kid. I mean, before the age of 10, I was probably around 7 or 8, and I remember somebody explaining to me that there were not just a handful of religions, but in the way that churches fragment and faiths warp and morph and develop, there are probably millions of faiths around the world. And I thought, well, if each one only has, say there's a million, say there's a million different schools of thought on how it is. That means they've got a 1 in a million chance. And if you are part of something and you're saying this is absolutely how it is, like I was talking with a friend recently who's a fundamentalist, evangelist, and he was saying, I said, well, what is the basis of your faith? And he said that the Bible is the true word of God. And I said, well, which Bible? And he said, oh, the King James or whatever it was. And I was like, but that's a Bible. That's not the Bible. I mean, if there are all these different Bibles, there can't be logically any such thing as the Bible. Mm-hmm. That's just a concept. So, in other words, you've only got, you have a fairly narrow chance of having it right. And but I think when you look at the title of Meet the Hybrids, it's right there, the lives and missions mm-hmm. of ET ambassadors on Earth. Everybody has a mission. Everybody is their own unique universe with its own unique rules and understandings, and nobody can tell anybody that they're wrong. It's that all true is a truth thing. Right. Everybody gets to come here and do their thing because it's always, everything is about relationships. Everything is about relativity, in a sense.
Right. So I want to ask you a question, Miguel. So would you say then, because I know there's been hot debate, it seems lately, about this whole idea of truth. We actually term this alternative group in some circles as the truth movement, that we're talking about truth. Some people say there's only one truth, a fundamental truth. Others feel that truth is subjective. What are your thoughts? Hi, this is Alexis Brooks. If you like what you're hearing during this episode of Higher Journeys, you'll definitely want to tune in to my conscious commentary this Friday, where I will be weighing in on some of the ideas we discussed on today's show. We'll dive a bit deeper into what was shared by our guest as we continue to unravel the mystery and the magic that surrounds us all. So take the higher journey with me. Tune in this Friday for Conscious Commentary, and please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And when you do, hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted as soon as our show airs. And now, back to our program. Are there multiple truths in your estimation, from your perspective?
This runs through my head every week. I wouldn't say every day, but there's often something that will cause me to reflect on this again, because it's one of the most interesting questions that exists as far as I'm concerned. Is there an objective reality or not? And I was listening to a French philosopher a few nights ago, and for him it was simple. Like, it wasn't even a question. Yeah, of course there is an objective reality, and he was at an event. It's the Science and Non-Duality, or SAND conference, and you can find it on YouTube, and there's amazing stuff on there. And yeah, I mean, he was saying that he was talking about truth and all that sort of thing, and he just said, well, sure, I am speaking to all of you right now, and we can all agree on that. But I feel like it's almost missing the point. For some people, it's super important that they get everybody to believe what they believe. That's a very common human thing.
I'm going to interject something. That's a very interesting point you make, and I agree with you. There are some people that seem just that their sole purpose is to convince another what they're saying is true, to believe. I just had this conversation with Whitley Strieber about this whole idea of belief. And that belief is really, there's just lots of holes in the idea of belief. When you think of belief, if you actually look up one of the antonyms for belief, it's truth. The antonym to belief, which begs the question. Belief is a conviction that's adopted versus a fact, versus it being a fact. It's an idea that is adopted and accepted by a given individual for a given reason. So what are we really talking about here? I had another point and I just lost it. But yeah, it's just very
Well, I want to
interesting.
say that facts are fiendish things. When I did when I was working in sustainability, I was also doing some master's level courses, and one of them was philosophy of science. And by the end of that course, basically it all just kind of fell apart in terms of the entire structure of knowledge on this planet. I just thought, man, we have agreed on nothing. There's literally nothing that all humans can agree on. The more I thought about this, and the more I've thought about this in this field, you just get into this place where even you don't even know if you're agreeing, because you could be saying like, what a beautiful color blue, but you don't really know if that other person is
It's seeing
seeing
blue. That's right.
exactly what you're
Absolutely.
seeing.
Absolutely.
And that's just the color.
Yeah.
And when it comes to concepts, when it comes to experiences, like if you went on holiday with somebody and when you were young and 25, 30 years later, you say, oh, do you remember this or that on that holiday? And they're like, no. You're like, oh my God, but it was your idea that we went to that club. You introduced me to that person, etc., etc. And they've blanked it. I mean, for them, if you hadn't mentioned it, it would not exist in their world. And that's a thing that everybody else who was on that holiday knows happened.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
memory is dodgy, perception is dodgy. I mean, we know that when you look at memory, it changes over time. I went to what was termed the 14 times unconvention, and I still have my lapel badge. This was like in 1994. Bud Hopkins was actually there talking about the Brooklyn Bridge abductions. He just published his book on that. And oh my God, now all I can think of is Bud Hopkins. What was my point?
We're losing our points a lot here. Well, I tell you what, while you try to resurrect your point, I'm going to go back to the point that I lost that I wanted to bring up.
Cool.
Look, let's go back a little bit. Stay with us, journeyers. We're all over the map. By the way, Miguel and I spend endless hours having these sorts of conversations, so I just feel like we're letting you in on our private chat today. But one of the things I was going to say, Miguel, insofar as you're talking about people being so adamant about wanting, or so, dogged about trying to convince others of their beliefs, you have to wonder at some level, is that doggedness perhaps at some level coming at trying to convince themselves?
Right.
Right? This is what made me think of Whitley Strieber in the talk that we had last week, because he was making sort of this, not really an analogy, but take going to a church and you're listening to the preacher in the pulpit and he's screaming to the top of his lungs about what it is and how it is and this is the way it is. And he made that point that perhaps that screaming and that adamancy is coming from, at some level, I don't believe what I'm saying. Oh my God. But the more I talk about it, the more I talk about it, the more I talk about it. So I think the mind can even trick itself, and often does. That was my point.
And you get the opposite, right? You get, as Oscar Wilde said, methinks he doth protest too much. You get people who come off as super homophobic, and it turns out that they are bisexual or gay.
Yeah.
And it's been repressed. So
Sure.
there's all these kind of personal truths are a nightmare to kind of, it's so hard in this life as a human being to stand in front of even a friend, a stranger, anybody else, and say, this is my truth. I mean, for some people, they can't shut up, like myself. It's, it's, I have the opposite problem, but it depends. It depends how personal that truth is, how difficult it is for me to spit out, this is part of my world, this is part of my history, this is part of my reality, this is something I value, this is something I regret. So I have always stood in absolute awe when it comes to the hybrids, thinking about the level of, well, I mean, we haven't even dealt with the fact that humans come in different varieties, that they're not all the same color, they're not all the same sex, don't all have the same philosophy, etc., etc. And people are killing and dying for those differences every day since the year dot. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. So then you have people coming forward and saying, I am, not only am I, maybe, no, perhaps I'm female, perhaps I'm not heterosexual, and not only all of those things that people seem to have a problem with in our culture, but I'm not even human, not entirely. Part of me, yes, but there's plenty of me that isn't. And by the way, that means that I look at things thus, and they will, as in the book, in their talks and documentaries and so forth, they will share their story. And, to me, that's an act of incredible bravery.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm so glad you brought this back to the hybrids, because there's so many, again, everything is connected that we're talking about, but that was a perfect segue to bring it back to these very unique individuals in this incredible book that I so feel, Miguel, reads like a compendium for life, not just for the hybrids, but for all of us. And yet you say, and I'm going to quote you, you say, this book will offer, speaking of differences, this book will offer every reader a different experience. We all learn in a unique way, and different things will resonate at different times. But within these pages, some of our biggest questions are approached from the perspective that the hybrids take, including, and speaking of, the concept of God, the true and multidimensional nature of reality, immortality, etc. And yet, it's said in the book that each of these hybrids offer just their little piece of the puzzle to all of these, their little truths, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about these guys, I mean, in the 90s, I knew plenty of New Age people, and, it was that kind of rave generation, and, it was absolute mayhem for a few years, and there was a lot of interest in spirituality, metaphysics, as part of that whole period. I mean, it's always there, right? It's always ongoing. But in that time, I met a lot of those people, but I only met one single person that I felt was actually legit. My good friend Mike, who showed me by their actions what living a spiritual life looked like. Whereas everybody else basically would beat people over the head with their latest metaphysical book, and that's it, and that's pretty much all they did. There was not they did not seek to enact or to embody the kind of philosophies within these books. However, when I was listening to the hybrids talk about their spiritual outlook and practices, I was shocked, because not only do they actually have practices, but they genuinely seek this as a path. Like, this is a lifestyle. They're not perfect. They don't claim to be. They are just as flawed as the rest of us, but they give it their best shot. They really do live this stuff, and they do it with humility, for the most part. And it was the humility, I think, that really caught my attention, because I never found that, other than, as I say, that one case in Western spirituality. So, that was very early on, very striking to me.
So glad you said the word humility. That's the word that's been running through my head, and I've been talking about that a lot. We all need to remind ourselves of that. We know nothing for sure, and be okay with it. So that being said, here, I couldn't agree with you more. Talk about, if you would, there are so many stories that were told, and I've got some of my favorites, but for you, something that was very inspiring and motivating and life-changing for you that stood out that you recall hearing from any one of the hybrids?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it was about. Um, See, when I first came at this, I was coming from the place of a social scientist. Um, to me, this was a piece of social science research, but I just felt compelled to do it because I wanted answers. I had my own um, metaphysical experiences in my life and an interest in UFOs from when my dad gave me a book on the subject when I was 5.
Hmm.
So it had always been there. So I was very, very curious. But my curiosity was from a profoundly intellectual place. I basically wanted people to explain, what is this? What is this thing we're experiencing right now? What is this? In what is its nature? In what manner is it constructed? For what purpose does it exist? Etc. 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 And I was one of those kids who just asked why non-stop until people scream at them. Like people would say, well, da da da, and I say, well, why? And they'll say, well, because blah blah blah. And I say, well, but why is that like that? And they'll say, well, because I knew this would just go on in a loop until they would lose it.
I can just picture you doing this now. I've got a visual.
Oh God, yeah.
Well, kids well, let me
still
stop you
working on
there.
it.
Kids love to ask why. I mean, well, this isn't unusual. That's an interesting thing. Asking why, rather than having the answer, there's a natural curiosity that is built into each of us, Homo sapien sapien, until somehow it's beat out of us and replaced with, oh, I've got the answer, and then I've got to go and preach it to someone else. Very interesting that you bring that up. I think curiosity, along with humility, is of utmost importance. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
where I was going with all of that is that Jacqueline was one of those people I was driving absolutely crazy, Jacqueline Smith, and and eventually she said, and I am paraphrasing, but I remember this conversation where she was basically saying that it's about, you kind of have to understand things with the heart, not the head. The head can only get you so far, but like, you can't understand love intellectually.
Right.
It's not it's experiential. That's the bottom line. It's the same with Buddhism or sex or dropping acid or, I don't know, diving off a cliff, or these things have got to be experienced in order to have an understanding of them. They are experiential in nature, and so many things are, if we truly would like an insight, rather than just parrot off the theory encapsulating a particular subject, or you just want to tell somebody the history of such and such, or
Do you think people are afraid of the experience, Miguel? This begs the question, why is it that so many people seem to be satisfied with getting information second or third hand, of reading a book, of attending a lecture about the things that they say that they're so interested in? Do you think people may be afraid of the experiential?
well, reality has to change. Everything that you do, everything you experience, consciously or otherwise, changes you. So you and I are not the same people we were at the beginning of this conversation, and we will be different people by the end of it. In a year's time, again, it's just constant. I mean, if you think of the trillions of electrochemical processes in the body at any given time, everything is flux. I mean, people talk about constantly Mercury being in retrograde, they talk about, climate change, and they talk about this and that, and the feel of living under the cloud of what the hell is going to happen with Brexit, etc., etc. There are constantly forces of all descriptions acting on us, and so I feel like people are permanently swimming just to stay in the same place. I mean, there's permanent stress and anxiety over work, over what will happen to their company, their business, their industry. With the times we live in, everything is changing so fast that people, I think, have become very averse to change. They've become scared of it. And any experience you offer somebody, I think, is going to trigger that internal fear of change.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, they're not going to be the same person at the end. And are they willing to put the work in? I mean, if it's a certain thing like, oh, do you want to read a book? Do you want to read a certain book? Do you want to drink a certain drink? Do you want to go to a certain bar? Very different to, do you want to fly with me to Peru, trek through the jungle for a week, and then do ayahuasca? Yeah, they're very different things, and every experience requires a different set of investments. And I think between all of the things that I've set out above, people struggle with the idea of committing to things that may change them.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. As we're talking about, now we're on to experience. We're going to say this and then wind down. I want to switch gears for a little bit as we wind down, I should say. I don't know about in the UK, but I know here in the United States, and I'm sure there as well, we have these different memes or expressions that pop up, and all of a sudden they're ubiquitous and everyone's using them. And the one that I have noticed lately is experience. The travel experience. Mm-hmm. Enjoy your entertainment experience. Mm-hmm. The this, the that, the other. And I sat back the other day and I said, I find this quite interesting. Why is everything, and particularly things that ultimately don't mean that much, we're attaching experience to? And I had to, I was being a bit critical, but there's a bit of an agenda, I think, there to diminish the value of the types of experiences that you're talking about versus your entertainment experience, if you know what I mean. So it's being used in a different way. It's being associated with things that really don't matter. So that true experience, life experience, going to Peru and trekking through the jungle for a week. I don't know about the ayahuasca, but you know what I mean. We perhaps they don't want us thinking about the experiences that truly count, the sovereign experience. Right?
Well, that's very interesting because, I mean, everything has been commodified, right? I mean, everything has been commodified in one way, shape, or form over the course of our lives. So I noticed this in there's a thing called E3, which is it's like video games. It's for that industry. It's the event of the year. I mean, it's sort of in decline now, but it certainly has been over the last decade-ish. And they would constantly, like, before each console manufacturer, like Microsoft with the Xbox and PlayStation, Sony with the PlayStation, they would, like, people observing this would actually say, okay, we're going to play like E3 bingo, and you got to count how many times people use the word experience, and people would make videos at the end, just basically joining together every time people had said the word experience in a given press conference demonstration.
Interesting.
And it's this thing that people are trying to kind of ram home, and I would be fascinated to be sat in those brainstorming sessions when people are advising the presenters to use the word experience and listen to their explanation of why you need to keep pushing this idea of experience. I mean, is it the fact that your experience is actually sitting on your couch with a piece of plastic in your hands, clicking buttons and looking at a screen and responding to stimuli?
Right. There you go.
Right? So
there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, whether we're using the word experience, whomever is advising groups of people in different venues to use any given word, I would love to be a fly on the wall to find out what the justification for it is. And I have a feeling it is not for humankind's best interest. Let's leave that there because I have 10 minutes reserved for something else that Mr. Mendonca is involved in. Let's switch gears. This has been great. Let's talk about E.T. as Artist by Faye Vale, a book that you just were involved with as editor. Mary Rodwell, our friend, wrote the foreword. This is amazing, guys. This book just hit the market. It is available on Amazon. Tell us about it as I'm showing some absolutely stunning images that Faye Vale wrote. Give us a little backdrop for how this book came about, Miguel.
Yeah, well, like I said, when we were talking a little while ago, I absolutely implore you to get her on the show so that she can walk you through it, because to hear her tell it in the way that she does is extraordinary. She is a 74-year-old woman, English woman from Leicester in the English Midlands, and I really don't want to say too much about the origin story for all of this stuff because I really feel like it should be saved. And she can do it way more justice. But let's put it this way, like a lot of people, she was living a very ordinary, average life, just a regular Joe or Jane. And then some stuff happened, and then some other stuff, and some other stuff, and then all of a kind of UFO ET nature. And then she basically, for the first time in her life, was compelled to draw, to find a pencil, find a piece of paper, and start drawing.
How old was she? I'm sorry. How old was she when this whole thing happened? Do you know?
Okay, so she started doing the drawing 12 years ago.
She's 74 years old. This is not early in life. Wow. Okay.
Right, so this kind of, yeah, I don't know how much of this kind of connects to your thesis about unconscious contact. I mean, it was very conscious, but whether there was other unconscious contact at other times, I think it's likely. I think most experiences probably have had more unconscious contact than conscious, but that's just an impression that I get. But yeah, she started and could not stop, and then she first of all had to start drawing with her left hand, which is not a regular hand.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, how weird is that? I mean, she just started scribbling, but she'll explain to you why that was done. And that itself is absolutely fascinating. And yes, the illustrations developed. They started off as literally, she said, I was scribbling like a 2-year-old. And then basically it moved on and on and on and on. And then it started to take form. And I think at some point she was able to switch hands and start using her right hand. And I've watched her draw. I was at her place a couple of weeks ago, dropping off her all the originals of the artwork that we'd scanned and used for the book. And basically, she goes into a kind of semi-trance. She slips into a very relaxed, somewhat distant state, and her hand just does its own thing. But she can talk to you as an observer. She's watching what her hand is doing and watching what is being produced, but she doesn't know what it is until, I mean, for some of the drawings, she doesn't even know what it is until she turns it upside down at the end. And there's a whole landscape with all these beings and people. And I mean, I cannot do justice to how extraordinary her story is and how exquisite the art itself is. But I would implore everybody, if they feel anything at all when they look at the images that they're seeing as we're talking now, find the book. E.T. as artist, E.T. as artist by Faye Vale.
Yeah, we'll make sure to have a link for sure. I've seen
Yeah.
some of the images, and you're seeing them, seeing some of those images now. And like you say, I'm sure the story that she will tell in obviously intricate detail will really stand us on our ear collectively. So many amazing things happening, Miguel. So many amazing things. Listen, we're just about out of time. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Always amazing to hear your philosophy and your tangents that are that you leave us with it. But I say that laughingly, but I'm going to go back and listen to the beginning on what you had to say about what started out as climate change and ended in truth. So thank you. I do appreciate it. So again, we are out of time. But listen, gang, before we say goodbye for today, I have a little reminder to everyone who's listening on YouTube, that is, listen, I'm just going to come out and say it. We would be so grateful if you would take the time, if you enjoyed what you heard, and please subscribe to Higher Journeys. Please also feel free to comment and like if you feel so inclined. And you know what we're saying these days, hit that notification bell to get announcements for whenever a new show airs. This is what we're doing these days, Journeyers. So we would appreciate it. So I thank you for that. I thank you, Miguel, my friend, as always, for being a part of a great conversation. And I look forward to seeing y'all soon. Take care.